Hey guys, Andy and Spoken Label. Yeah, spring is here. Yes. Oh, this podcast will go on a bit later, but take it with me, spring is here. It's been glorious today. We've been helping out my friend Jane today, with her little girl, and oh, she's nearly 3 and she's gorgeous. So me and Amanda have so it's been a bit of a later podcast today and planned, but it's a good job really because my friend who got with me today, the fantastic Joe Walsh, has been up in Aberdeen himself today. So he's been out poetry gigging himself, haven't you, Joe, today as well, mate? So.
Yeah, I've been, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, before we go on to that, what you've been up to today of Poetry in the Park with my good friend Finn Hall, tell us, I know you live in an area called Fet Angus. Have I got that right, have I, first of all, then?
Fetter Angus,
Yeah. So tell us
but with an
about,
X.
yeah, tell us about that then, because obviously, I've not a place I've heard of. My knowledge of Scotland is a bit limited
Well,
sometimes. Is it quite a
I'm not
small village, is
surprised.
it? Hmm.
It's a tiny village. It's literally 4 streets, and we don't even have a shop.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we have a part-time pub that's open 2 nights a week or something.
Oh, good grief, yes.
Um, I ended up here really. I mean,
Mm,
it's less than an hour's drive for Aberdeen, but it was very handy for when I was working. And I moved to this little village from a bigger town further west, and still in Aberdeenshire. Because I had horses at the time and I was offered a really good deal on a piece of land that I could have my horses at, which also backed onto some woodland with big forest
yeah. Oh,
tracks that I could
wow.
ride on. So
Wow.
it was too good an offer to miss. That's why I'm here really. I wouldn't have decided to live here otherwise. It was handy for my work. It was good for the horses.
Yeah, of course. There's all everything is. If times change, don't they, things all the time. So, but like I said today, you've been on a note today in relation to poetry. Before we go into your backgrounds where everything came from, I know I said before to you, I met you. Was it last year we met through our mutual friend Finn Hall? Was it?
Yes, it was last summer when I no, I think the first time that we met, it was before that. It might have even been the year before when Finn was doing the project about the high-rise block,
High
and he was
Rise.
writing
Yes, he was, wasn't he?
short pieces of writing based on that.
Oh,
That was the
yes,
first time that we actually became aware of each other, I think.
yeah, it was, wasn't it? And when people wonder that project is where you had to write stories reacting to each other and each other's pieces in the second half of it. And am I
Yeah.
right in thinking you were paired up with Amanda, or am I imagining things there?
No, I was paired up with, oh, and I can't remember the name, but it was someone from your neck of the woods, so your part of the world.
Yeah,
Um, but I can't remember the name now.
yeah. No time. People wondering that we've both forgotten. So you forget sometimes over time you do. So, but like I said, yeah, that was definitely you're right. I met the year before, and that was great. That was a great project as well. That. So now,
Yeah, it
obviously,
was.
then, yeah. Tell us about first of all how you met Finn Hall, then, and then we'll go into poetry in the park. I know you've been at today as well.
I was coming up to, I had decided I was going to stop working, which was a great position to be in. I was only 63 at the time, or 62 probably, and I was thinking with some careful budgeting, I can afford to leave my job early and concentrate on what I wanted to concentrate on. So I was writing already. I'd started writing more regularly during the last couple of years as I was working, after not having written for many years. And so I had quite a wee collection of poems by then. I saw post on Facebook about a poetry open mic that was going to take place in a village just a few miles away from here. And Finn Hall was the person that had posted. So I contacted Finn to ask if I could come along. I wasn't sure what the setup would be. So he says, "Yeah, sure, of course, come along." So I went along to that. The first time I went along to meet other poets. And it was the first time that I'd read any of my own stuff in front of other people as well. It was a nerve-wracking experience, I can tell you.
Oh, first,
I was soaked with sweat, like. Um, and I read two poems. I managed to get through it, and that was really the start of how I met Finn. After that, Finn invited me into his Blot from the Blue regular monthly online open mics. Started doing that, and then whenever there was another event happening that he was involved in, if it was local, he would invite me along or get me involved somehow,
yeah, it's great.
including his festival that he had in the village that he lives in.
Oh,
So yeah,
yeah,
he
of
got me.
course. Of course,
Yeah, he
yes.
had a festival. Well, so twice he had it, 2 years running. He had a festival. So that's how I became involved, and that's how I met so many other people as well.
Really? No, no, that's good. Things you do is like you just need, like I said, that's not one person to give you encouragement. And we said this off mic before, it changes your life completely. Like
Yeah.
my case would have been, and I've not told you the story. I did I learned creative writing at university back in 1998, 2001. And then as I graduated, I drifted apart from a couple 5, 6 years from it. And I got persuaded to go to a writing workshop in 2006. And then it
Hmm.
like everything expanded, what, 3 or 4 years later, I was at the open mic circuit. So I've been active ever since, one way or another. So you do something, it's like, is that one thing that starts you off? It never stops, does it? And after that. So
Yeah, you just need something to get you started, or
yeah, yeah,
somebody or something to just get the ball rolling, and
yeah.
then well, it's up to you after that.
Yeah, I agree. Now, you're telling me, obviously, I know about this already from talking to you previously, because people wonder, we've known each other, like I said, we've been talking a bit for a while anyway. I know you were
Yeah,
writing at school originally, weren't you, as well? But that was more song
yeah.
lyrics, wasn't it?
Started writing song lyrics, but I was listening to at that time when I'm talking about even in primary school, I used to scribble things as well, and I was very good at. I mean, the only subject I was any good at really at school was English. Anything to do with writing stories or reading stories or um, interpretation of a story, I could write. I could do these things really well. Everything else was it was a bit unenjoyable for me. But yeah, but mostly secondary school, I started writing some poetry then, and it was poetry in the form of more like song lyrics. Very along the lines of something like Mark Bolan or David Bowie would have written. I would sort of emulate them a bit.
Yeah, you were telling me
Um,
obviously about Bowie and obviously about Mark Bolan before anyway. So yeah, well, he's like, I know you told me before, obviously you've got older siblings, and this was like
yeah,
your music back in the 70s, really, which is fair enough, 'cause it was your time, really, wasn't it?
yeah, it was my decade. But before that, I'm one of 10 children, and I've got starting from my oldest sister who was a big like Roy Orbison fan,
Oh
and
wow. Oh wow.
yeah, so good music was in the house. My mother and father both listened to music. A lot of jazz music was played, positional music as well, Scottish and Irish music,
Of course, yeah, of course.
and yes, there was a lot of music that played. My older brothers, one brother in particular, was a big Bob Dylan fan, a Leonard Cohen fan, and I sort of got into Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen because of him. Once I got past my sort of early teenage, crush on Bowie and Bolan, it was like something a wee bit more serious. And I took a real sort of interest in their work. So I became a big Dylan and Cohen fan. I'm still very much a Leonard Cohen fan. I probably listen to Leonard Cohen or read something on Leonard Cohen's every day.
Yeah, he's unbelievable talent. He really, really was.
Yeah.
It's like his early stuff. You do wonder what drugs he was taking sometimes, but still
Yeah.
incredible. Right, I agree with you completely on both
Mm.
all those points there with that one. Now, obviously, people who know your work will know. Obviously, like there is a lot of about your politics in this, and also your sexuality as well. Was this coming through during your songwriting days at school, or did this come along when you got back to your writing when you were 63?
I remember probably politics. I was family are very left wing. Both my parents were very left wing, members of the Socialist Worker Party, and very active within that. So politically, I would make political comments and things that I wrote. My sexuality, I kept very hidden, because that at the time, I'm talking about in the late 60s, early 70s, when I was becoming aware of myself, and these were very complicated at the time, mostly illegal until I was 21, I think, and frowned upon, including by. I knew that my parents didn't approve as well. So I kept that very much to myself, so I wouldn't have written about that. But I did sort of write about nature and politics was probably the two things that I wrote about.
Yeah, of course. I understand you completely with that. Now, if people want to research you, obviously, you would have known you've done three. I'll get this right now. I'm going to probably, I've done, I've got it wrote down wrong. It's four full-length books and one split book. Or have I got that wrong? I might have got that completely wrong
Yeah, yeah.
here.
I've got three
Ah,
poetry books
that was it. That was it. Yeah.
and one split book. I wrote
Right.
a poetry book along with a guy called Colin Meek, who
Mm,
was my publisher as well for all of
mm.
the books that I've had published. And I've also got a book published of short stories.
That was it. That was it. No, this is just typical me, just shit for brains, misreading
That's all
things
right.
as well. Yeah. Now, yeah, but I've got them all wrote down, so I know we'll get the order on this. I will talk about all of them really, because as I said, I've read particularly two of them, and
Right.
I've got a question we can ask about all of them. So I want to learn first of all, then, your first book, if I read this right, was Joe, aka, wasn't it?
It was Alexander, aka Joe.
Ah, that was it. That was it. I want to clarify I got the title right. I did see that and I was wondering about that. So that's
Yeah,
fine then. That's fine with that. So tell us about this book then and what made you want to bring this book out first then?
yeah. Well, I had written, I don't know, by that point, I had written a couple of hundred poems probably, and it was probably out of that. Although I was sort of unaware, really, I wasn't such a good judge of my own work. But probably there was 100 poems out of that 200 that I was confident enough in to think other people might want to read these. And they were very personal as well. I have to say, very, very personal poetry. And I was by this time talking about including my sexuality as a gay man and writing about my early experiences of how that felt. To be in a sort of secret existence almost. Um, so I have a good friend called Spike Monroe, who's another poet and writer, lives in Edinburgh. And although he was a new friend at this point, only 4 years ago, and he said I should try and speak to Colin Meek, who has his own, who publishes online, does online publishing. And Inherit the Earth Publications is what he has. And he also does For the Men, the few poetry um, editions, which are he will ask for lots of submissions on a voluntary basis, put together a book, release it, and all money goes to charities. So it's a really good thing to be involved in. Although I am less involved in it now than I was, but for a while I was a regular contributor. Um, anyway, I did approach him and I said I was interested in maybe putting together a book, and he basically just gave me such huge encouragement. Send me some poems then and let me read them. And so I did. And he says, right, he says, how many poems? Can you send me 50 more poems?
Wow.
Um, and I thought, yeah, I can, but I don't know what ones to give you.
Yeah.
So I picked the ones that I thought would be better. So I gave him about 60 poems all told, including there was a short story in amongst that, which I was tempted to read today, but decided to read another one instead. Um, but anyway, I sent him the things. He says he re-edited them a wee bit, and he, had a look at them, and he tweaked bits of them, and but by and large left them as they were. And we published that first book, which went on Amazon for sale very quickly because he does things very quickly. It's very difficult to keep up with because he's very economical with his time because he's also in a band. He writes his own stuff. He writes loads of stuff, and he's in a punk band called X
He's busy.
which is doing really quite well over the last couple of years. So his time is not to be, it's no good time to waste, really.
Yeah, I think there's some ways I can understand that. Like, is obviously myself, like I'm busy man myself. I do podcasting. I'm a writer myself, and I do music for my own band as well. And I'm at the moment producing an album for a young London rapper at the moment as well. So yeah, time is often you don't get it,
Yeah,
do you? Sometimes I know what you mean, mate, with that. So no, it's fair play of you. So now, obviously, after Alexander, aka Joe, which I completely misread before, which is typical me, but the first book of yours you sent to me, which I've really really enjoyed, which I'm going to show now because I've got it with me, is yours is obviously Oblivion Disguised.
yeah.
Now, out of interest, how old is the picture on the front of the book? First of all, it's a
I think
lovely
I'm.
picture. It's a lovely
Oh no,
picture.
I wish there's still as much hair as that. And the same lack of wrinkles. I was 16, I think,
Oh wow, 6 weeks, 16.
maybe 17.
Sweet 16 and never been kissed,
Yeah,
right?
no, rarely. Let's say.
No comment. That's all I'm going to
Yeah.
say there, mate. So now,
Mm.
obviously, I really enjoyed this book as well. I did because there's a couple of things that
Thank
caught
you.
me out with this. Now, people see the book, obviously. There's a bit of prose at the beginning of the book and a bit of prose at the end of the book. Now, I
Yeah.
want to learn, first of all, what was the conscious decision to do the piece done in brackets her, then done as him as a conclusion? What made you want
Yeah.
to bookend the book with both of these?
I don't know what made me do that, except I did bookend them because Meek suggested that they worked better as bookends. So I had written the two pieces of work and sent them because when we were putting that book together. And I maybe want to explain to people where the Joe and Alexander and all that comes from. My name is Alexander Joshua Lawrence Walsh.
Hmm.
And at some time in my adult life, I decided I preferred the short Joe
Yeah.
as opposed to the longer Alexander. So that's where the Joe, AKA Joe, comes from. And most everybody, I think, calls me Joe nowadays. By now, I wouldn't think anybody calls me, apart from a doctor, maybe, or the dentist, calls me Alexander. Yeah, but sorry, to answer your question, I wanted to write something for my parents. I wanted to say something about their life, um, about the hardships within it and the determination that they had to be good working class socialist people and also and bring up a family and how difficult that was, especially when they ended up with such a large family. So I wrote the poems really without thinking much about it. And they're in a prose style, as you say, and they're quite long. I went back and I tidied them up. I included them in I hate the title, I have to say, because in the second book that you're probably going to mention, I've changed the title of two pieces of prose poems, and I wish I had
Ah,
thought of that idea first, or I wouldn't have called them him and her. But what I meant by the title, him done and her done, was that at the end, towards the later years, like all working class people, they were done in. They were
ah. I was
after
wondering.
after a lifetime of just slog and
Yeah,
worry, living on no money and all that. That's what the title means, but I don't think it works very well. I mean, you shouldn't have to explain it. That's what it means for such a short thing. But anyway, that's what I was trying to say. So mixes, let's make them bookends because it would work really well to have one at each end and your other poems in between. So that's what we did.
right. Yeah, I understand. I knew the two characters in these pieces meant a lot to you. Didn't
Hmm.
know they were your parents. That does make sense what you said there straight away with it. Other thing
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed on Oblivion Disguised was, and I've not come across this before. Well, I've got a story about. I've come across this once before in a novel, and I got thrown off the bus for this. And I'll tell you why. Because you write some of your poetry in pure Scottish.
Hmm.
So, and what I realised about that was seeing it on there. Because the only time I've ever read that was, and I presume you've read it, was Irving Welsh's quite infamous, obviously, Train Spotting novel.
Yeah.
And
No.
yeah, that is obviously in pure Scottish dialect. And the only way I could read that is to read it out loud.
Oh, yeah.
And
Right.
I got thrown off a bus once because every other word
For
was
doing it.
F this,
That's
B
right. I
that.
did a lot
Yeah.
of swearing.
Yeah. A lot of swearing. That's why I still went, oh, great. But yours is much more subtly done. The use of the language obviously is not as confrontational. But
Yeah.
was that?
Everyone else, and well, we both come from Edinburgh, so we have the
Mm,
same dialect. We have the same dialect of Scots and the same slang terms as well.
mm,
So there's similarities, but the poetry that I write in Scots tends to be not so much in the way that Irvin Welsh writes. I suppose that mine is a little bit more refined.
yeah, definitely that. No, the tone's completely different. It particularly hit me well with this on. I'm going to ask you about both of these poems and one at once. Was Barefit Broth. So, which I
Oh
was
yeah,
very, yeah, I want to know what a barefit broth is, first of all. I'm guessing it's some kind of local food, is it? Or is it, it's nothing to do with that at
it's
all?
no, it's soup, and
Ah,
it's the most basic soup that you can make. Basically, it's made with a lump of any sort of fat that you can be had, whether it's margarine or butter or some other sort of fat off a piece of meat or something like that, and onions. Bare
Ah,
fit is food. So it's called barefoot broth, meaning barefoot broth, meaning it's you would only eat that when you're really down on your upper.
right. Yeah, I understand now. So that was obviously talking about what your parents went through again, basically. Yeah, no, I understand.
Is that yeah, it's
Yeah,
exactly that. And so there's a name that's well, it's used over different parts of Scotland to describe that sort of soup. It's
right.
very
No,
low in nutrition, of course. It's got very little nutritional value, but it would fill your stomach.
right, I understand completely now. That's why. So yeah, makes sense what you've done before. And obviously, then another piece came along straight after that, not long called The Hair. And I felt that
Oh
was
yeah,
seemed to cut from the same cloth. So that's obviously talking about what your parents probably did for food sometimes, is basically going along and making means, basically, didn't they? So
you
yeah,
catch a rabbit or something.
yeah,
We lived on the very edge of Edinburgh, right onto the countryside. I was pretty much as a child growing or a lad growing up. I was pretty much a country boy. I still am at heart a lot of the time, although I do want to move back to Edinburgh and enjoy the city again. But that story, the hare, it was a I felt guilty about that for years and years and years. I had caught a hare and which I killed with a by throwing a stone. And it turned out that the hare was a pregnant female. And when my dad saw what I had done, he was in total opposition to that. He wasn't he couldn't condone that in any shape or form. So I thought I was 14-year-old or 13-year-old or something. I thought I'd done something heroic, and he left me in no uncertain terms that I had murdered an animal for for no good need at all. So years later, I wrote that poem, and it's a thank you to my dad in a way for making me aware, and but also an apology to the animal itself and to my dad too. There was a confession as well. I suppose you could call it that. It was a confession of sorts.
yeah. No, I get it. You know, it does. I mean, great poetry like that. Somebody's like that, but you laid everything on the line, and it's no, it's a great piece. It really does. That and the book's full of them. Really, it's a lot. You could tell this book means a lot to you, and it shows you
Hmm.
each piece. The other one I wanted to ask you about what this book was, because I'm guessing it's a place, and I wanted to learn more about this. Was I'm going to hopefully pronounce this right as well. Picardy Place, is it, or Palace?
It's called Picardy,
Ah,
Picardy
Piccadilly.
Place.
See, people know the Nicholson or Andy N pronunciation skill is crap as
Yeah,
always.
it's just because of where we are in the country.
Yeah,
So Picardy Place is in Edinburgh. It's do you know Edinburgh at all?
no, never been to
No.
Ontario at all. So
So
no,
it's at the end of can't even remember what road it's at the end of. It's at the sort of the top of Leith Walk before it would go into the Leith part of Edinburgh. And there's a pub in the corner with seats and tables on the pavement. And I met my friend that I mentioned earlier that I became friendly with this guy called Spike Monroe. Um, and we met for a coffee, and then he says, would you like to go for a, no, we go for a drink? And I says, yeah, I would like a beer or a whiskey or something. So we went there, and it was a gay bar. And it had seating outside, and I just thought we would like to go there and sit. Because he's gay as well. And miraculously, we never knew each other when we were both in Edinburgh because he's only like a year older than me or something. But our paths never crossed that we are aware of. Anyway, that poem, Picardy Place, is that street in Edinburgh, and we met there. And the poem that I wrote is really just an account of what happened. But I've
ah,
brought in
yeah,
other parts of it. Like when I'm referring to my friend Tom, who the young lad in that poem reminded me of, and I also mentioned Tom's mother as well, who I think I described as a Edinburgh hawker woman or something along the lines of that. But she was a very old. Tom's mother was Tom comes from what we in Edinburgh call a hawker family or a Scottish traveller family, settled, no longer travelling, as in gypsy wise.
Right.
But his mother was very old school, and that's why, and I refer to her because she carried her wealth in her earring. Well, these women like that carried their wealth in their earlobes or on their fingers. It was all like the rings or their earrings was the family wealth, if you like.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I understand now. That explains everything to me. Brilliant stuff, mate. Brilliant stuff indeed. So now the next book I want to talk about is your short story book, Scunner. This,
Mhm.
I know as people see on this, they say it's described of an imaginary village in Scotland. Now, you've
Yeah.
told me obviously the word that means scunner was. Again, not a word I'm familiar with at all because I'm not Scottish. Oh, I am
No.
Scottish descent, not directly Scottish. So, and it's initial words, it's got meaning of disgusted and sickened. So,
Mm.
obviously, with short stories, then obviously, people say the two books I've read, particularly, have all got stories in what to go alongside your poetry. Have you always been writing stories as long as your poetry, or has this come more afterwards?
Um, Afterwards, but not long afterwards. When I stopped working, my intention was to write stories rather than poems.
Hmm.
That was my priority was going to be poems, stories, sorry. And the poems kind of took over. But I had written, when I stopped working, at the point where I stopped working when I was 63, I basically wrote non-stop. I don't for months. I hardly moved away from the computer. I was working like long shifts on the computer, writing poems, stories, poems, stories. I've written. I don't know how many stories I've written. I took to counting them up because I've got two sort of collections. One of them being the Scunner collection, and the other one being a collection of stories from when I was a much younger lad growing up within my family. And they're written in the dialect, the same dialect that Irvin Welsh would use. These ones. I've written them in Broad Edinburgh dialect.
Yeah, obviously not as sweary.
There's not as much swearing, one or two wee sweary words, but not many. No, it's written mostly without the swearing or the drunks.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Now getting played of it now, that fair play out of it. So now, so obviously this been coming out obviously after Oblivion Disguised. What made you want to go and do a short story book next after doing a poetry book then? Was this always a plan, was it this or?
No, it wasn't. Well, I was always writing, and I thought I don't know what I'm going to do with the stories, but there was no plan really. In
Hmm.
fact, there was never really a plan except that I was leaving work so that I could write my own stuff. Beyond that, there was no plan. So I think I must have written Oblivion Disguised, and then I had been writing these stories, a story. I was writing the two things at one time, and there wasn't like I was finished that, so now I'm doing that. Everything was written just in the same sort of haphazard way. I would sit down at my computer and write something, and one day it would be some poems, another day it would be a story or two, or whatever.
It's
And then I sort
same
of
pro
divided it up.
same approach I've done to be doing for years now, to be honest with myself. 'Cause you know already, I know you've kind of read my second novel, you poor man. Right, so
I've read the two of them.
yeah,
Read both of them.
yeah, both of them. Like I said, like I've done poetry myself, done lots of books for poetry as well. But it's like I think when you're moving on from genre to genre,
Mhm.
it's a real fascinating challenge. Like just doing one bit one day and something, then moving, training your brain, isn't it? It's almost like writing another genre another
Right.
day. How did
Yeah.
you find that yourself? You were jumping around from genre to genre when you started properly doing this.
I think my brain just does that anyway. I don't think I do sort of settle because the way I read things, I mean, at the moment, an example of that would be the last books that I read are Year Two,
Mm.
um, Birth and Death, but in between that, and I'm reading Jean Genet's Lady of the Flowers.
Oh, that's a change.
Um,
That's a change in tempo. Yeah.
well, exactly, yeah. So, but I haven't finished that yet, but I was sort of reading bits of that. I find that quite a difficult book to read non-stop. I like to read a bit of that and then read something else. And so, but my brain's quite happy to go from one thing to another. I think my poetry reflects reflects that. The sort of I've had positive comments from people commenting on the breadth of my poetry that I can write, you know, almost at opposite ends of a spectrum. I can be writing about one thing one day and something totally different the next. I've never just stuck to, well, ever since I was young, very young, I've never stuck to just one thing.
Yeah, I think good creative people have that sort of restless streak with them, and I'm like that. As I said before, I
Mhm.
do all kinds of never sit still, and never have done. And I think since I got together with Amanda, my wife, Amanda's got much like that as well. She seems to
Yeah,
be constantly having like three or four things going on at the same time, and I think it's creativity. Good creative people have that when they can don't sit
I
still for
think that's right.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with you with that one. So I said it's, but obviously you're after that. Obviously, when you did so after doing Scunner, you then did a split book, didn't you? Which this is one I've not read actually. Shoulders to the Wheel with your publisher. So, what was the decision to do a split book next then?
I wish I could remember why we did that. I think we just fancied it one day. When we were talking, I think Meek, call him Meek first, just to be called Meek. So
Hmm.
that's why I refer to him as Meek. Um, I think he just suggested us doing something jointly one day, and we decided it would be put, 20 poems each or something, together, and it would be a book for the two of us. And this one again was for charity. It was, we wouldn't make any money from it. We would pay for it to be published, and then any royalties from that would go into the charity pot. And mostly it's homeless charities that we put money towards. So that was kind of the thinking. There was no great thought process behind it, or no great. I think we thought, well, let's see how we go on and see how creative we can be together. I don't think we actually did. Um, I think we basically stuck to our own things, and we just put the poems together. So I think if you looked at the book, you would see my stuff and you would see his stuff, and they rarely cross over. There may be common themes because we have common beliefs in terms of like political beliefs and stuff. So there's similarities there, but um, but the poems are very different from each other, and we didn't collaborate on a poem, for instance,
Yeah, no,
which
I
I
get.
think that might have been a better experiment.
Yeah, I've done a couple of split books with Amanda before now, and each one of them we always try and co-write things. And there's one that it's a true story, this as well, where it ended up. I've done a band with Amanda, a sporadic band as well, and she did the lyrics on one of the pieces, and she said to me afterwards, "Oh, do you remember co-writing this piece with me?" And I looked at it and said, "Well, that line's mine.
Mhm.
I don't know about that line." And we apparently both reckon where we both rewrote each of his sections three or four times, so it completely bamboozled the pair of us.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I know what you mean completely. Right? You do, but sometimes it can be good fun to try the co-writing, but doing the split book still is still a great experiment and trying it
yeah.
anyway.
I,
So
I, I certainly don't regret having tried it, and I would certainly write with I would try it again with people.
yeah, no, I agree, mate. Good stuff. Obviously, your last book, unless you've got another book out I don't know about, is this one here, Oppressive Love. That one.
Yeah,
I'm good. I'm showing here today in this one. On the cover, is this your mum and dad? Is it? I presume.
yeah, that's fine. It's a wedding photograph.
Yeah, it looks like you look like your dad, actually, to be honest with you. If people look at your earlier book, Oblivion Disguise, I can see your dad in you, actually, there. I can there a little bit, definitely so.
Yeah, a lot of people have said that. I look very like his dad when he was young,
Oh, do
apparently.
you? Oh, wow. Yeah, right. It sounds
Hmm.
interesting, that, really. So, yeah, obviously, then, this is obviously me, then, is when I'm reading Oblivion, I get this right now, Oppressive Love. This, obviously, me, is obviously a quite clear follow-on to Disguised. Now,
Yeah,
where did the idea of the title Oppressive Love come from, first of all?
that came from Meek as well, actually, because he picked up on poems from Oblivion Disguised, and I think I mentioned something about oppressive love, or when does love become oppressive, or something. I can't remember exactly. And he thought that's a really good title for something, and then the book itself was his idea. He says, I really think you should write that a follow-up book to Oblivion Disguised. It says, and if you could perhaps write poems that allow the people in Oblivion Disguised to reply to me. So I'd written all these poems, including one from my mother and father, and I was saying all this, and he thought, he said, can you write poems that would allow the people in that book to come back at you?
Right, yeah, no, it does make a lot of sense what you're saying there, Jonathan. And I wondered about that when I was reading the two books because they did seem like there were a lot of
Yeah,
links in these books straight away with it. So now, obviously, like with the earlier book on Oppressive Love, this one again you started off with a bit of prose again, and the prose is longer in these books as well, actually.
yeah, it
So
is.
yeah, like Adam started off as obviously first of all, then like, and you have to explain to me who Adam is and what made you want to start the book off with this piece.
Right. So Adam is my dad,
I was wondering that, yeah.
and the reason I started with that one, because again, it was to be we agreed that there would be bookends. We would have the same format with a bookend piece of prose in this book as well. So I started with my dad because I wanted my mother to have the last poem called Eve is my mother, and I wanted her to have the last word.
Right, right, yeah. No, I was wondering about that again. Reading about before, it makes sense because that's what I was wondering. So it does make sense that I think the tone of the poetry is a bit different in this one as well, actually. Where it was
Right.
nice to see actually, like for example, this day belongs to rain. With this one here, like there actually was some English coming into your poetry a bit more here. Was this a conscious decision with this book, was it? Or was it just natural progression?
I think it was just natural progression. I think there's more mature poems in it. I think I had sort of got better at writing, a bit better at writing, and the ideas I was having were more mature. Whereas the first two books were, I think I was clearing a backlog of stuff that was just jammed in my head for years. So I think that was a backlog of stuff that came out in the first two, and this book was a bit more mature.
I think it's an actual progression with books themselves anyway. Because my first book I did was one called Return to Cape Town. That's very like that. It's a book that is as of its time. I don't dislike it. I know you'll be proud
Yeah,
of your own books, but over time, it's the more you do it, the better you get at it straight away. I'm a firm believer in that. Yeah, and I agree with you.
yeah.
I think it's probably the best book out of the two. But they're both good books, so I enjoyed both of them a lot.
Right,
So
good.
yeah, so no,
Oh, that's good.
get you completed with that one. So like I said with that. So other piece I want to ask about in this book here was. I'm gonna make sure I wrote the title down right here because I'm capable of writing these down wrong. It was Crown of Thorns as well.
Yeah.
Because this was really interesting. This one was going on about all the very stark about your self-torture is adored and your crest already adored in the last two lines, for example. Where did this poem come from?
Um, it was supposed to be a Christmas poem. It started off being a Christmas poem, and obviously that was a referral to Jesus Christ. But like a lot of pieces of writing, and I'm sure that other writers the same thing happens. I started writing one thing, and it ends up being something else.
Yeah, I've gone for that.
And I think that actually what happened in that poem was I was kind of chastising myself for being allowing myself to be a martyr, just a martyr to my own sort of feelings. And yeah, that's I think that's really what that poem is about. But I suppose partially as I was sort of looking at. I've always been very fascinated. I'm not a religious person in the slightest, but I have always had a fascination for the life of Jesus Christ, and what drove him. I'd love to understand what would drive anybody to go to these lengths. But anyway, that's what it started off being about him, and it ended up being about me sort of wallowing maybe in the stuff.
Yeah, I get you
But
completely.
can
No,
you
no,
see that?
I can get that. Yeah, there is. There's one like Catholic guilt in this book to me. That poem in particular. So that's why I was curious about that. So yeah, got it completely. Excellent stuff, mate. So now that's all my questions about your books to date. Now, I always like to ask the guest is next, and I know you're writing quite frequently in the moment anyway. So, do you envisage another book coming out maybe someday?
Oh yeah, I've probably got enough for two books at the moment that I would be pleased to publish. And I've just finished a novel.
Oh,
Um,
oh,
well, I wrote the novel during that period I described earlier, where I was just writing non-stop, 18 hours a day or something. I wrote a novel. Well, it became a novel, let's say. It started off being a story. I didn't know how long it would be, but it became a novel, short novel. And I left it because I sort of shelved it because I was just caught up in other things. I went back to it a couple of months ago to edit it because one of the things that I had done with it takes place in Aberdeenshire and it's written in English because I see no point in me trying to write. Well, for one thing, I don't speak an Aberdeenshire dialect. There's a very clear Aberdeenshire dialect and called Doric, and I don't speak it. So there was no point in me trying to do that. So I wrote the story as written in English, but where possible, when there's a dialogue between two or more people, I tried to make it in an Aberdeenshire dialect to a degree. Although Aberdeenshire people will line up to slap my face, maybe when they read it.
yeah.
But
No,
I'll have to apologise in advance for that. But that's what. So I finally finished it a couple of weeks ago or something. Um,
brilliant,
to the
brilliant.
stage where actually it's read. It's a final draft. Well, it's in a good stage of draft, and it needs um an editor or a publisher to look at it now and decide if it's okay now or if it has to if there's room probably is room for rewrites and all that sort of stuff.
No, fingers crossed you mate with that one. Definitely good luck. I didn't know about that. So brilliant. We're not going to
Yeah,
ask
no, I
you
should have
tons of
mentioned it earlier.
questions. We're not going to mention tons about that yet. So we'll leave that for a future podcast, right? That way, I don't want to give too much away because that way, then
Yeah,
we can bring it back on in the future when that book's ready. 'Cause I would love to read it, to be honest with you, because there's so much detail in the two books you sent me. I'd be fascinated to see how you actually did it. So, what is it about? Is it about the length of my novels? About 50,000 words, is it, or is it a bit more?
I think it's about 70,000.
Oh yes, it is look a bit longer then. No, no. Good. I look forward to reading it in the future, my friend. Definitely with that one. So keep us
Good.
informed.
I'll make sure you get a chance.
Yeah, please do, mate. I've got one of my next books ready. I'm going to speak about this in a minute as well, off mic. I'll send my next one to you when it's out, possibly later on this year. So, but anyway,
Good.
let's wrap up part one here now. Obviously, I use this word then is a joke, really. The hard sell, which is the soft sell, really. If people want to get hold of your books, where do you recommend they go, first of all?
Probably me directly, and I can either send a copy by post. So my email address is Alexander Walsh 593 at btinternet.com.
Brilliant.
Or contact me via Facebook. Um, just finding me on Facebook, Joe Walsh. You'll soon see me.
Yeah. Yeah, but he's among my friends, so yeah, easy enough to find that one straight away. So
Yeah.
brilliant. Okay,
I'm
yeah,
not a big I'm not a big user of multimedia or anything. So um, that's the two places. I have got a Blue Sky. I have got a Blue Sky account, but I can't even tell you what the title, what who I
I'll
am
find
on
it.
it.
I'll have a look. I'll have a look see if I can find it later on that one. So that's fine, mate. So I know what you mean. It's a funny one, Blue Sky, but come on to another day. So I use it. Not quite sure if it's for me, but I do use it, I must admit. So yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, I'm quite
Okay,
new to it, so
okay, guys. We'll wrap up part one here because when Joe comes back, we're going to sort out in a minute what we're going to do for parts two and three. Because I know you're going to do certainly a story and some poems. I think second
Yeah,
half, and we're going to just sort out what we're going to do for TikTok as well. So, but it's been great this
right.
day,
Okay.
mate. Because like people
Yeah,
are wondering, obviously we booked this in last year, didn't we? And
yeah.
it's been a few delays for my health and Joe's health as well. So,
Mhm.
but it's been great to catch up at last, mate. Thoroughly enjoyed it, mate. So,
Certainly has.
okay, guys, girls, as I always say, come back to 2 minutes time. So we'll see you all. Two shakes of the dice.